Well, South Carolina found themselves sitting at 9-3 at the end of the 2024 regular season, sort of right on the outside of the playoffs, looking in kind of on that bubble with teams like Illinois, Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss, sort of that first group of teams out. Can they improve in 2025? Probably need to go 10-2 and better to get into the playoffs in 2025. Can they do it? Or will a brutal 4-game stretch in the month of October derail their season? I'm going to let you know right now because guess what? It's time for another prediction video. Oh, yeah, good morning. That is Uncle Lou here. That's right. It is me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And two, in addition to that as well, Loustradamus back for yet another prediction video for you. I do an entire series of these every offseason. I think I've done 8 or 9 of them so far. You can go back and check out some of the other teams. I've done Clemson, Tennessee, Alabama, Penn State, Southern Cal, Colorado, several others too. Just click back on any of those teams you might be interested in. We're going to go through the schedule game by game. You can see I've got it pulled up right here. We're going to go through the schedule game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Before we get to that, though, let's recap South Carolina's 2024 season and look ahead to their 2025 roster. Now, of course, last year, like I mentioned at the top, they did go 9-3 in the regular season, which is a really good regular season in any year for South Carolina. No question about it. I mean, you got to remember, South Carolina's never won the SEC. They've been in it since, the 90s or whatever it is. They never won the SEC. They've never even made an SEC championship game. They're not what you would consider sort of a traditionally great SEC program. They were in the ACC prior to that, where they were independent for a while, ACC prior to that. They did win the ACC once back in 1969, which means they still have more ACC titles than Miami does, but no longer in the ACC. They're in the SEC. So they went 9-3, which is great. But you look at their losses and you look at their wins, and we can debate their losses, and we've done that. We did it when they happened. The LSU loss had to drive the South Carolina fans crazy. There were some very questionable things that happened in the second half of that game, but that's sort of water under the bridge. So they lost to LSU, they lost to Ole Miss, they lost to Alabama. 3 of the best teams they played. Now, they did manage to beat Clemson, right? They won on the road at Kentucky early in the year. They had a win against Oklahoma on the road. They beat Texas A&M, which is something they've struggled to do since Texas A&M joined the SEC about 12 years ago now, I guess. They beat Vandy, Missouri. So a pretty good season, and of course capped off with a win against Clemson, like I mentioned at the end of the year. So a really good year for South Carolina at 9-3. They went on to lose their bowl game to Illinois. One of the better bowl games, I thought, of bowl season last year. They played in the Cheez-It Bowl. No, the Citrus Bowl. They played in the Citrus Bowl, came up short against Illinois 21-17. But they had a really good season. Didn't end the way they wanted, but they had a pretty good season, and they're looking to springboard or use that as a springboard into 2025. And here's the problem. There are reasons to be high on South Carolina. They were a fun team to watch last year. Lenore Sellers is one of the most exciting players in all of college football, but they lost a lot. In the end, it is South Carolina. They don't recruit in the top 5, top 10, anything like that. When they lose valuable players, whether it be to graduation, NFL, or portal, it's extremely difficult for them to replace those players with equally good players. That's just the reality. I'm not knocking them. I'm not talking trash. And I have looked for reasons all offseason to be high on South Carolina. And to be honest with you, I am high on South Carolina. I think they could still be good. I do think Lenore Sellers is one of the best returning quarterbacks in the SEC. I'm high on Nicholas Harbor, the sort of tight end wide receiver hybrid. I think he could have a breakout year. But they lost a lot at the running back position. They lost a lot from their defensive front. And they have probably the most brutal month of October, maybe of any team in the country. You can see it up there now. They've got those 4 games, LSU, Oklahoma, Bama, and Ole Miss, 2 at home and 2 on the road. It's just a brutal October. And as far as making the playoffs go, if last year's any indication, and that's all we really have to go on so far, 10-2 was kind of the cutoff point last year. You had a few 10-2 teams that didn't make it. You had a few 9-3 teams that did because they won their conference like Clemson. But generally in the SEC, you're looking for about 10-2 should be the goal, I think, for any team that plans on making the playoff. Now, it's possible some 9-3 teams get in if there aren't enough 10-2 teams, or there's a whole myriad of things that could happen to get a 9-3 team in. But in terms of like whether it's the South Carolina fan base or the South Carolina team and program itself, and they're saying, let's map out a path for ourselves to the playoffs, I think the goal should be to go 10-2. Well, when you look at those 4 games coming up for South Carolina in the month of October, that means they would have to go at least 2-2 there and then win the rest of the games on their schedule. And I have wanted to predict South Carolina to make the playoffs. I've wanted to predict them to make the SEC championship game. And they could still do those things. But in sitting down today to do this prediction video, looking and getting into detail and going into some depth on what they lost and what's replacing it, and then sort of pulling up this schedule and seeing how it lays out, I think it's going to be very difficult for South Carolina to either go 10-2 or make the SEC championship game. Nearly impossible, I think, with this type of schedule. But let's talk about what's coming back, what they lost, what they might look like in 2025. That starts with quarterback Lenore Sellers. One of the most exciting players to watch last year. He can do it with his arm. He can do it with his legs. He had a ton of touchdowns, both through the air and running. Single-handedly won a few games for them last year, and he's back, and that's a huge deal. You can't over-exaggerate the importance of South Carolina getting him back. They've got a couple of wide receivers back, including Bennett, Mazio Bennett, I believe is his name, and Nicholas Harbor, who is technically a tight end, but plays split out a lot. He literally has world-class Olympic speed. He was on the Olympic team at one point. He has quit track finally. So previously, every spring, he has participated in the track season for South Carolina, which is taken away from his time to sort of devote to football. That was not the case this year. He was full-time football all spring long, and I think he really needed that. He was kind of raw as a football player. He wasn't somebody you would look at and say, you know, he sort of has all the fundamentals down or whatever. He was more of like just an athletic freak that was playing sort of that wide receiver, tight end hybrid position. I think he will improve a lot from last year to this year, and I think he's going to be a big problem for opposing teams. He's a matchup nightmare. He's similar to Brock Bowers. I'm not suggesting he'll be as good or put up the numbers of a Brock Bowers, but what I mean is he's that type of player in that he can play in close or he can split out wide. And as a defense, you got to decide if you're going to sort of dedicate a defensive back to him so that they can keep up with him speed-wise, in which case, size-wise, they're going to be completely overmatched. Or do you go with a strong safety or a linebacker who might be more similar in size to Nicholas Harbor, but likely won't be able to keep up with him in terms of straight line speed? It's just a matchup problem. And I would not be at all surprised to see him have a breakout year and have a huge year to get key pieces back on the defense. Dylan Stewart, Jalen Kilgore, Brian Thomas. They added a lot through the portal, which a lot of teams in sort of the South Carolina tier do, you know, the sort of, I don't want to say middle of the road. I think they were better than middle of the road last year, but teams that don't recruit in the top 10 or top 15, they tend to sort of use the portal a little bit more than the teams that do. So they brought in several defensive players along the front seven to help out. They brought in a center. They brought in a tight end. They brought in a lot of different pieces. They got at least 3 defensive players out of the portal that I think will be starting in game 1 for them. So lost a lot from that front seven last year that I thought was one of the best in the SEC. We'll see if they can sort of live up to that sort of standard they set last year on the defensive front going into this year in 2025. Shane Beamer back as head coach. He has exceeded all expectations in South Carolina. He has won more games in every season but one than the expected win total. So in other words, you know, they put out this expected win total Vegas does every year. You know, this team's going to win 7 games. This team's going to win 6 games, whatever it is. South Carolina and Shane Beamer have exceeded expectations in every single year but one, including, of course, last year. They ended last year on a 6-game winning streak. Of course, then lost to Illinois in the bowl game. Sellers is back, 18 touchdowns through the air, 7 on the ground. They brought in a running back from not Utah State, was it? Faison, and he's one of these kids that's not really eligible, but since the NCAA is granting unlimited eligibility to everybody, he's appealed for an extra year. And from what I could find, there's been no decision made on that appeal, but I'm going to assume it gets approved because everyone's appeal gets approved. I mean, Diego Pavia is in like his 8th year now. I mean, you can pretty much play college football as long as you want now. So I'm assuming he's going to get improved. They brought in another running back out of the portal a couple of weeks ago too, but Faison had over 1,100 yards last year, 8 touchdowns with Utah State. So they lost a lot at the running back position last year, so they're trying to sort of backfill that with a couple of a couple of transfers. I mentioned 3 transfers on the defensive side of the ball likely to start. I think that's probably true. But they've just got an absolute brutal schedule. Like I mentioned, home games against or away games against Missouri, LSU, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. Home games against Vandy, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Alabama. They also play 2 non-con Power 5 opponents. They got Virginia Tech to start the season and Clemson to end the season. So an uphill battle for South Carolina. Again, all offseason, I've been talking about the possibility of South Carolina playing in an SEC championship. I even made not a prediction, but somebody asked me like around February or March, like, if you like, give me 2 teams right now, if you had to pick right now to play in the SEC championship game. Now, this was back in February before I start looking into anything, doing any official predictions. So you can't hold me to this now, but it was on a call-in show back in February, March, and I said, Alabama and South Carolina, or I think I said Texas and South Carolina, somebody in South Carolina. In other words, I've been looking for reasons to be extremely high on South Carolina all offseason, and I am looking forward to watching them. And I do think they're going to be exciting on offense again, and I think Lenore Sellers is going to be an amazing quarterback. But they lost a lot, and the schedule is absolutely brutal. What does Vegas think about South Carolina this year? Now, you can take these numbers with a grain of salt because, like I mentioned, they have exceeded these numbers 3 of the last 4 years. Under Shane Beamer. But South Carolina's picked 11th in the SEC right now, according to the Vegas odds. Auburn and Oklahoma and Tennessee have better odds. Florida has better odds. Florida, Auburn, Oklahoma, and Tennessee all have better odds of winning the SEC than South Carolina does, according to the current Vegas numbers. They're 11th. Obviously, Texas, Georgia, Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, those are like, maybe you would say those are obvious. But Florida, Auburn, Oklahoma, Tennessee, all ahead of South Carolina in terms of odds to win the SEC. The only team South Carolina is ahead of in terms of odds to win the SEC is Missouri, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Vandy. So not a lot of expected out of South Carolina from the people out in the desert making these types of odds. The win total is 6.5. Is that, or is it 7.5? Let me look it up. I don't want to give you the wrong number. The win total for South Carolina right now sits at 7.5. That's got to be too low. That's got to be too low after what I saw last year from South Carolina, doesn't it? And again, they have gone over this number 3 of the last 4 years, but the win total right now sits at 7.5. So if I think South Carolina is making the SEC championship game or the playoffs, then apparently I'm the only one that thinks that. So let's find out if I do actually think that. Let's go through the schedule game by game, and I'll give you a winner and a loser now for every single week. All right, they start off, like I mentioned, against Virginia Tech. This is going to be a neutral site game in Atlanta, one of these kickoff classic type games. I think this is the Aflac kickoff game. Anyway, Virginia Tech was a disappointing team last year. I was high on Virginia Tech last offseason. They had some of the most returning production in all of college football, including a quarterback. They had a very manageable schedule, and they came out in week 1 and lost to Vandy. So this year, sort of nobody's talking about Virginia Tech. Maybe this is the year they sort of sneak up on people. I don't think that's going to happen against South Carolina, though. I do not think Virginia Tech is capable of beating South Carolina at home, away, neutral site, the moon, the roof of a Walmart. It wouldn't matter. I would pick South Carolina no matter where the game was played. I think South Carolina starts 1-0. And we talked about the middle of the schedule. The beginning of the schedule sets up great. South Carolina's got an opportunity here early in the season to develop a lot of confidence, to get on a roll, and to get some serious momentum heading into that 4-game stretch in October. You can see they follow up that Virginia Tech game with a home game against South Carolina State, which is an in-state lower classification school that they should roll. It's a name your score game. They should get the backups in early in that one, that kind of thing. Then they have 3 conference games. 2 at home and 1 on the road before their first bye week. They host Vandy. I know Vandy was a good story last year. I know Diego Poverty is a good quarterback. They're not a good team. They beat Alabama, and it was a miracle, and it was great, and we all laughed and pointed at Alabama, and we would do it again if they beat Alabama again. But the reality is they weren't a great team. They were a 6-win team. It was a good story it doesn't necessarily mean they were a good team. And I don't think they're going to be good in 2025. And if South Carolina loses this game, then you can just forget it. They might not win a single game in the month of October if they can't beat Vandy at home, which I think they will easily. South Carolina, I have at 3-0. Then they go on the road at Missouri, and this is an interesting game here. Missouri has given South Carolina fits over the years in the SEC, back to the SEC East days. This is sort of called the Battle of the Columbia's game. Missouri is in Columbia, Missouri. South Carolina is in Columbia, South Carolina. This edition of the game is in Columbia, Missouri. So first real road game of the season for South Carolina after playing Virginia Tech on a neutral site to kick things off. Got to go on the road here and take on Missouri. But look, if South Carolina's got any chance at all of sort of getting over the hump and making a 12-team playoff or making an SEC championship game, these are the games you got to be able to go on the road and win. You can win by 1, you can win by 100. We all know Georgia's, their struggles like on the road at Kentucky for seemingly no reason at all, right? Even in the years where they were winning the back-to-back national titles, they went to Kentucky and beat them like 16-13 or something in one of those years. So you can have weird games like that, but it's the difference between knowing how to win those games at the end versus losing those games at the end. You cannot lose this game on the road at Missouri. I don't think they will. I think South Carolina beats Missouri and they're 4-0. Then you come back home and play Kentucky. And if there's anybody in the SEC that's worse than Vandy, it might be Kentucky. Them and Mississippi State, I guess. Another home game for South Carolina, and another game they absolutely have to win. Now, Kentucky can be a physical team, and they have gotten to the point now where they're almost completely turning their roster over in the offseason through the transfer portal, new quarterbacks all the time, new linemen, skill position players and all that. But I don't know. It seems to me like Kentucky kind of peaked a few years ago. As far as the Stoops era goes, it was sort of a steady climb up to about 8 wins. I think they got 9 wins one year. It seems like they're headed back down the other side of that hill now. I'm not high on Kentucky going forward over the next few years. And I think South Carolina beats them. I think they start 5-0, which is extremely important because you see the next 4 or 5 games there coming up are just absolutely brutal. So they get a bye week to sort of recoup. Maybe you get an injured player or two back. You rest up some hurt players, whatever, and get ready for just this gauntlet of games they have coming up in the month of October. Starts on the road at LSU. LSU probably has, from what I've seen and heard, the widest range of predictions for 2025. I've heard people say they're going, 11-1, 10-2, winning the SEC and making a run at the national title. I've had people tell me they're going 7-5 and barely make a bowl game. They've got talent. They've had talent in years past and not been able to sort of get to the 9-10 win mark or get to the SEC championship game. They did in Brian Kelly's first year, losing to Georgia. I'm kind of on the fence about LSU. The talent is undeniable. I really like Nussmeier at quarterback. They've got one of the best young running backs in the SEC, almost over 1,000 yards last year as a freshman. And their defense has the potential to be really, really good if they hit on some key portal additions. Last year, they did not hit on enough. 2 years ago was like probably the worst LSU defense we've ever seen, the Jaden Daniels year, right? He goes on to win the Heisman. Their offense was unbelievable. Their defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. Basically, last year's Miami team. That's what 2023 LSU was. The defense was better last year, and as a result, I think the overall, the team was probably better. The offense was not as dynamic without Jaden Daniels, but Nussmeier did well. Yeah, he's got to cut down on the turnovers. He had too many interceptions. But this is one of the most difficult places to play in all of college football. And I believe LSU has a bye week before this game as well. So you get the bye week, which helps. You get an extra week to prepare. Yeah, they also have a bye week. So it's not you get an advantage in that you get a bye week, but you don't get like double the advantage, because they also have the bye week. So they get the same advantages you do there. I just don't think South Carolina is going to go on the road and win this game at LSU. Now, I went back and looked. LSU has lost at least one home game every year but one under Brian Kelly. And I believe that was the Jaden Daniels year in 23. They did not lose a home game, but they got blown out by Tennessee a couple of years ago. They got blown out by Alabama last year. And these are years where they're winning 9 and 10 games. So it's not impossible to win on the road at LSU, but it is one of the most difficult places to play. And this is the first team that South Carolina will have played all year where they will be at a clear talent disadvantage. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to lose every time, but it does mean you got to play some of your best football to win. And on the road at LSU, I just don't think South Carolina can get it done. I think they dropped this one to the Corn Dogs, their first loss of the season. And then they play Oklahoma and Alabama in back-to-back weeks. This might be the two biggest weeks in South Carolina football history in terms of back-to-back home games. The Clemson game is huge every year, right? You get when they get that at home every other year. But like, look who they're playing before Clemson. Like this year, it's Coastal Carolina. As far as like a 2-week period, back-to-back home games for South Carolina, this is probably the biggest 2-week stretch of home games ever in Columbia. Now, I've already done an Alabama version of this video. So if you've seen that video, then you know I think South Carolina is beating Alabama. I think they have a bad taste in their mouth left over from last year's game. They nearly beat them on the road in Tuscaloosa. That game went to overtime, and honestly, South Carolina kind of gave that thing away at the end. I think they get a little bit of revenge this year. I think Alabama's going to be really good, by the way. I've got them at 11-1. This is Alabama's only loss, according to the Lustradamus prediction for this year. I've got Alabama at 11-1, their only loss on the road at South Carolina. But, just like South Carolina having to go to LSU and play is extremely difficult, I think Alabama having to come to Williams-Brice also extremely difficult. But the Oklahoma game, you know who Oklahoma plays the week before? And I know, look, South Carolina's got to play at LSU, so that's tough too. And I've got them losing. Oklahoma plays Texas the week before. Rivalry game, emotional game. I think Oklahoma's going to lose that game. So, both of these teams will be coming off of a loss, South Carolina and Oklahoma, but it's at South Carolina. Again, the atmosphere at this game is going to be unbelievable. And I think South Carolina beats Oklahoma. So I've got them losing to LSU, but then I think they beat both Oklahoma and Alabama at home. Now, I think they go on the road to Ole Miss and lose. Now, I think Alabama's better than Ole Miss. I think Oklahoma's better than Ole Miss. Maybe. I think Ole Miss, I think, is taking a step back this year. But again, it comes down to home versus away. It's always more difficult to play away from home because it's an unfamiliar environment with a hostile crowd. And depending on where you're playing, it can be more or less hostile. I would put Ole Miss somewhere in the middle in terms of home field advantages. But the thing for South Carolina about playing on the road is, in addition to having to yourself play on the road, which is a disadvantage, you're also not getting the advantage of one of the best home field environments in the SEC, which is Williams-Brice Stadium. And I just think after these two big wins here, South Carolina gets caught celebrating a little too much that third week there and loses on the road to the Lane Train. So they go 2-2 in that 4-game stretch. And listen, there aren't very many teams in the country that would do better than that. If you're watching this video, whatever team you're a fan of, if they were playing at LSU, home against Oklahoma, home against Bama, and at Ole Miss in a 4-week stretch, there's not very many teams that would do better than 2-2. But they could go 0-4 here. South Carolina could. I mean, it is hard for me to get sort of the history of South Carolina out of my head when I'm doing these prediction videos. And while I realize that what happened yesterday or 100 yesterdays ago doesn't directly have an impact on what's going to happen tomorrow in terms of predicting college football, it is hard to get it out of your head. And so I think having South Carolina go 2-2 here with wins against two blue bloods, Oklahoma and Alabama, is pretty fair. I don't know how confident I am in that. They legitimately could go 0-4 or 1-3 in that 4-game stretch. But I'm going to put them here at 2-2. Then they have a bye week, and then they play on the road at Texas A&M. Why is nobody talking about Texas A&M? And I'm pointing at myself included. I know they weren't great last year. They lost to Notre Dame early in the year, and people kind of forgot about them, really. But then they beat Missouri sort of like, I think it was around halfway through the season, maybe week 7 or 8 or something. They beat Missouri by like 40. Missouri was a 9-3 team last year. Texas A&M beat them by like 40, and then I think that was the first time since the Notre Dame game where people looked up and went, "Oh yeah, I forgot Texas A&M was still around." And then you looked and they only had a couple of losses. And then the Texas game came up at the end of the year, the Texas A&M Texas game, the last week of the regular season. And had Texas A&M won that game, they would have been in the SEC championship game instead of Georgia because of the way the tiebreakers would have worked. So in Mike Elko's first year, and I really like Mike Elko, by the way, look what he did at Duke and where he took them in a short period of time. I mean, they were beating the soul out of Clemson in his, second year there on opening day or whatever it was. Anyway, no one's talking about Texas A&M. I like Mike Elko. It's going to be year 2 for him there. Now, they lost some from last year's team too, but they get a lot back. And they also have a really, really good home environment and a very tough place to play. Now, South Carolina does get a bye week after that brutal 4-game stretch there before they have to head on the road to play Texas A&M, whereas Texas A&M will have played on the road at Missouri the week before. So maybe that bye week is enough for South Carolina to sort of move on from October and sort of put their head down and get that win. But I don't think they are. I think they lose that game on the road at Texas A&M, which is going to be an absolutely devastating loss, most likely, for South Carolina in terms of their chances for the SEC championship game and most likely their chances for the playoffs. They then come back home and play Coastal Carolina. I obviously think they'll get a win there. And then I've done the Clemson video too. And look, I think South Carolina beats Clemson. I mean, so you can make the case. I've got South Carolina beating the 3 best teams they play and losing to Texas A&M and Ole Miss or whatever you want. But it's just, college football goes this way sometimes. And just because I'm predicting this to happen doesn't make it true or mean that it will happen. But I think 9-3 is very fair for South Carolina. Forget who I have them beating and losing to for a second, and just look at this schedule. 9-3 would be another good year for South Carolina. I don't know that they have the talent top to bottom and the depth. By the time they get to this Alabama game, Ole Miss game, Texas A&M game, Clemson game, I mean, you've got players that are hurt and not playing, players that are banged up but trying to play. I just don't know that South Carolina's got the talent on their roster from top to bottom to navigate this type of schedule to much better than a 9-3. I think 9-3 is the ceiling. I think. In other words, I don't think there's any possibility they exceed that 9 wins. 7-5 is a possibility here. I feel like I'm probably more positive about South Carolina than most other people are if I've got them at 9-3. I have a feeling most South Carolina predictions are going to come in at around 7-5, and that might be a more likely record than what I have, 9-3. But if what we just thought was going to happen happened all the time, we wouldn't even have to watch the games, right? Like I said, the win total is 7.5, so 7-5 would be surprising, but 3 of the 4 years they have blown that number away with 8+ wins. So I think they're going to beat Clemson. I've already done the Clemson video. They beat Clemson 2 of the last 3 years. Now, both of those wins were on the road at Clemson. They need a home win against Clemson. I think the fans are going to be a little disappointed if it happens the way I have it laid out, where they already have 3 losses before the Clemson game. And so they kind of know they're not making the SEC championship game and most likely not making the playoffs. I think having that Clemson game, I think it would be big for the fans. They can get a win against in-state rival Clemson, who I think is going to be really, really good. I do think Clemson's making the playoffs. I think it'd be really good for the fans. Now, look, if for some reason South Carolina goes on a remarkable run and they get to this Clemson game with 2 losses or less, this will be the biggest South Carolina Clemson game in the history of mankind, period. Every rivalry game is big. Every South Carolina versus Clemson game is big because it's a rivalry, and I get that. But if South Carolina is sitting on 2 losses with a chance to make the playoffs and the only thing standing in their way is a 10-1 Clemson team or something, what a game that will be. What a game that will be. So I kind of hope I'm wrong, and South Carolina is sitting at only 2 losses maybe when that game is played. Anyway, that's my thoughts on South Carolina this year. Love Lenore Sellers. Shane Beamer has blown away every expectation anybody had for him. They had a really good year last year at 9-3, close to 11-1 last year. I mean, I think they were robbed in the LSU game. They came up a little bit short on the road in Tuscaloosa. So I don't know if they can repeat that. I just don't know if they can repeat that. I've got them at 9-3. Let me know down below where I'm wrong. Have a good morning.